All right, I've been promising you all more content on the topic of tachi and Shin Gunto versus uchi-gatana in the practice of Japanese style swordsmanship. Now, first caveat, as always, I don't consider myself any kind of master expert, anything like that, nor do I ever intend to contradict whatever you're being taught or the system that you're training in. But hopefully my experience might be useful to you. Speaking of my experience, as I've mentioned in previous videos, decades and decades ago when I started training in various forms of traditional Japanese swordsmanship myself, my first shimken for training with, what I could find at the time, was a Type 98 Shin Gunto. And there were several adaptations I had to make out of the gate, but there's certain things I found that I really liked about it as well, compared to, which you're probably more familiar with from your own training, which would be an uchi-gatana. Now, if I was not wearing the sword for whatever I was doing, kata cutting, certain systems of kenjutsu where you don't do that, then my biggest challenge was adapting to the differences in sori, blade curvature, and the design of this suka versus something like this. However, if I was doing any training where I was wearing the sword, drawing the sword, biggest challenge I was confronted with was, well, these have hangers compared to the kurigata on an uchi-gatana. Uchi-gatana is specifically designed to be worn wedged into the obi, edge up, close up against the body versus something that's designed to be slung from a hanger, edge down. There are certain things about this design I've come to like and, well, certain problems I've stumbled over the decades. Now I'm going to separate these videos into a couple of different sections, and one big division point as we start by talking about hangers versus kurigata is whether the sword that you have or that you're working with has one hanger, one ashi, or two. So a tachi or an older Type 94 Shin Gunto or a naval Type 97, they tend to have two, whereas the later Type 98 or the NCO Type 95 come with one. Or on the 94, that second hanger was removable, so it might be lost, so you might just have the one. So for today, let's talk about the upsides and downsides, the potential and, well, potential problems of single hangers in the practice of, well, different kinds of Japanese style swordsmanship, specifically around wearing and drawing. Okay, I figured we'd start where I did all those decades ago, just trying to make this work as if it were one of these. In other words, we're just going to shove it through the obi, edge up, and see what happens. A couple of things to consider, though. First of all, you'll notice I've taken the tassel off the sarute, the lanyard loop, and tied it to the ashi ring. Or, highly recommended, just tie a sageo to your ashi ring. But your biggest concern lies in the position of the ashi in terms of the distance to the koiguchi. This is also true of the kurigata on an uchi-gatana. Some systems are really particular about what this should be. And side by side, this Ryujin Type 98 reproduction, you'll notice that the ashi ring is pretty similar in distance to where the kurigata is. As a rule of thumb, at least in my head, the kurigata and the ashi ring should sit so that when you grip the sword with your left hand for drawing or re-sheathing, below your hand. So it's not under your hand in the way, but not too low to interfere with your draw stroke. And this one, just right. Now, certain reproductions and yes, antiques, that ashi might be in all sorts of different places. It might be up really high in the way or way down low in the way on the other end. Now they are adjustable. They're just wedged on here, and maybe one day I'll do a video, detailing how to do that. But if you got a really nice reproduction or especially an antique, you might not want to for fear that you're going to damage the saya doing so. Now when it comes to my own original antiques, I bought them, as I've mentioned many times, with the intent of putting them to hard use. So yes, I've made adjustments, which then have been followed by having to repaint the sayas. But I wasn't worried about that kind of damage and was willing to take those risks of dinging stuff up. So I've been able to adjust those parts. Depends on what you get, what you're working with. This one, again, conveniently happens to be in a good position. So what I can simply do is, yes, indeed, slide it through my OB edge up. And then what you're going to notice is that ashi hooks the belt really nicely. In certain ways, more securely than a kuragata does, but it's in a different position, and that's going to be an issue here in a second. Then you take your, well, in this case, tassel, but tsugeyo, and you can secure it as you normally would, depending on, well, how you're being trained, what your system dictates, or how you're going to be using the sword. Now, I've been taught two extremes. If I'm going to be wearing the sword and moving around vigorously doing other things, martially, I learned to really secure this thing in snugly so it's not going anywhere. But then I can't do sayabiki, the pulling of the saya that facilitates the draw stroke. If that's something that you're doing in your practice, yeah, adjust, well, as you see fit to get that right amount of, yeah. Not a problem, right? Until it potentially is. And this may be just the way I'm built. But this ashi is on the bottom, not on the side like the kuragata is. And where that becomes a problem for me is if I'm doing sayabiki, and depending on the system you're studying, you might do this too. If you're doing the particular style of draw where you are starting with the blade edge up, but you want to get that horizontal or upward rising cut. So halfway through your draw, you rotate the saya and the sword. One of the things I found is as I'm doing this and that at the same time, pulling this around, that ashi leg collides. It either snags on my belt or actually collides with my hip. And I'm encountering resistance. And because I'm encountering resistance, yeah, that can tangle up my draw. That could be a bad thing. So one of the things I learned to do to compensate, which again might be contrary to what you're being trained to do, is if I want that horizontal or uppercut, what I'm going to do is prematurely rotate blade and saya to make sure that doesn't happen. So you might not collide with this issue at all, depending on, you know, how you wear your sword and how you're built, but for me, it's a noticeable problem. But yes, very workable with a few adaptations. Okay, let's talk about actually wearing it from the hanger. All right, sorry, something I forgot to cover. I did the demonstration of wearing this edge up through the obi today with a reproduction that does not have a leather field cover on the saya, like this. Now these leather covers are awesome for protecting your saya, but wedging this through an obi, I found that leather, it's really grabby to the point that sayabiki is difficult to impossible, which is why I did the demonstration with one without. However, sometimes having that slide can go the other way on you. These saya tend to be significantly slimmer than a wooden uchigatana saya that you might be used to, and if it's a metal one, a whole lot heavier. So when they are in your obi, there's a whole different physics around how these things like to slide and move around that might take some getting used to. All right, back to the subject of hangers. All right. I'm going to subdivide our discussion of single hanger wear into two sections based on height of wear, length of that frog, starting by putting up a series of photos of both historic examples of sword belts and hangers, and also some modern reproductions you might be able to get your hands on. Now, I don't have any of those because the historic originals are very expensive and probably too fragile to want to use. And I haven't bothered to buy one of the reproductions yet. So far I've been making do with analogs that I've created myself, or, well, that I use for other kinds of swords that are worn for hangers. But you're going to see some variation in, well, materials. Some are chain, some are leather, some are canvas. Some of that's based on rank, and some of it's based on time and what was available in the supply chain, or what they actually found worked that the officers preferred. But the design itself is pretty ingenious when you look at it closely, because it offers the officer a couple of options for wearing this single hanger sword. One thing you're going to see is a hook or hooks up high, close to where the frog meets the belt, that allows the officer to wear the sword, well, right below the belt, kind of where I have it here. Versus if they were to hook it down the end of that frog, and that frog is about 7-8 inches, about 18 centimeters long, down their leg. And why would they want one versus the other? We'll talk about that. But if you're wearing it up high, you can take that extra strap or chain, loop it over the top of your saya and hook it up here, extra security. Or if you happen to be wearing a sword with 2 ashi, 2 hangers, you could take that extra length and hook it to the back one. Versatility. All right, let's start by talking about higher wear. Okay, higher wear. Shorter frog. A couple of these things are actually going to be common to longer and shorter that I'm going to cover. But the first thing you're going to notice is, depending on how your sword is balanced, it mostly hangs vertically-ish, canted a little bit to the front. And again, that could be more or less depending on the balance of your sword. But a single hanger is, it's going to leave it flopping like, yeah, you can hear it banging into stuff. It's not nearly the tripping hazard you'd think it is, but it's definitely distracting and annoying, so I can see where Japanese officers just forgot about this and shoved the weapon edge up uchigatana style through their weapons belt. It's a lot more secure for things like running around on a battlefield. And yeah, it's going to get to be a problem after I've drawn the sword as well. But benefit of a hanger in general is having the weapon down lower on your hip. And at this height, it's about where I would reach down and find it pretty naturally with my hand. It's going to be a similar height when we talk about double hanger swords like tachi. It's going to be about here. Having a sword from a hanger, if you study swordsmanship that does this, you know that it allows for a longer clearance in your draw stroke. I can draw a much longer sword comfortably from even a short hanger like this, which is why cultures that use longer swords favored hangers. But the natural position, again, if you're familiar with systems of swordsmanship that use this orientation, like a lot of HEMA styles, it's going to be grabbed initially, edge down, and therefore most easily drawn like so into what you might describe as prime or preem, right, in HEMA saber. If that's not what I want, when I reach down and grab, I could rotate it into another orientation, right? I could do that, or that was sideways. Let me take it all the way up, pull it all the way up, edge up. Look at where it is about now, about where I'd be used to having it if it was an uchigatana wedged through my obi. But a couple of things to consider. First of all, some but not all Shin Gunto have latches, and sometimes they don't work. But if they do, there's a good and bad to that. It allows me, when I reach down and grab and orient to draw, I don't have to get my thumb in the right place to break that koiguchi seal. But I do have to use my other hand to hit the trigger to release the weapon properly, or, yeah, not going to work so well. So that's a good and bad about this particular design. However, short hanger. If I am bringing it up here close to my hip, where I don't have as long of a draw stroke and I rely on sayabiki to get clearance, I don't have a lot of room to move here. And it's not what you're used to feeling. So you're going to have to get used to that. And you're probably not going to like it, I'm going to say. Drawing from an uchigatana and obi is a lot nicer that way than this. The other part of this is I have not yet shown you what happens after I draw the weapon, and then I need to get my other hand on the blade to use it. Again, not as much of a tripping hazard as you think. but distracting, annoying, absolutely. And then the other concern you've got is when I go to do noto, I don't know where this is exactly. What I have to do is I'll reach down, find the hanger, and I let the hanger help me. By pulling on that hanger a little bit, it tells me which is up and which is down, gets my hand in the right position, and then basically, as you see, I'm doing noto pretty much uchigatana style. But, yeah, for a moment there, this is flying around free, dangling in the wind, banging against my thigh, and who knows what else. And it's just, again, distracting, uncomfortable, not very graceful. So therefore, is this a preferred method for wear for me? Absolutely not. But I've trained with it to see how it works. And yes, there are other styles of swordsmanship I study that use a single hanger. One other thing you can do with a single hanger and certain double hangers before we move into the longer one, though, is if this orientation somehow is in your way, you can rotate the weapon backwards. This was used in cultures either when they're riding or using bows or pole arms to get that slung sword out of the way. Does this make it harder to deploy? Well, it takes one extra quick move that I found I can do pretty instinctively. Reach back, go for that hanger, but I'm looking to hook the suba and then roll this forward. When I roll it forward, look where it is. Very easy to deploy. But one thing I have to watch, especially if I've got baggy sleeves on, is making sure I clear that kashira, or else it gets stuck in my armpit, which, yeah, very embarrassing and ungraceful. But if I do it right, it's just one little extra move to deploy the sword, and basically what I'm saying is you can make it work, but it's not my favorite. That said, okay, what's the difference if this hanger is significantly longer? Had to move the camera so you could see this thing way down here on my hip. This is about the comfortable extension of my arm for reaching down and catching it. And I have pretty short arms. Obviously, individual officers would adjust fit as it suited them. Down here on my hip, believe it or not, the kojiri, the end of the saya, it's a couple of inches off the floor still, so it's not dragging, but this longer hanger exacerbates the issues with the single hanger system in terms of the way this flops around, unfortunately to the point where I could certainly see the potential for this thing to get tangled between my legs and trip me. That would not be very graceful, so not a good position for a lot of vigorous moving around comfortably. I could still flip it around backwards to get it out of my way, and yeah, there's more clearance here underneath my armpit to flip it forward. It's a little bit more of a reach to do that. I kind of have to lean and fumble for it. So yeah, there's a lot more fumbling. But if you're familiar with styles of swordsmanship, cultures that wear swords from longer hangers, it allows them to draw a much longer blade because yeah, there's so much more clearance in that draw stroke. Now the longer hanger also allows me, when I pull it up here to where the uchigatana would normally be, I've got more room to do something like sayabiki, so it's kind of nice. But yeah, probably more trouble than it's worth, so why would you even go with this for a sword of this particular length? Well, consider when this design came into use, the Japanese military and their society in general was westernizing, which includes Western-style seating and riding in vehicles with Western-style seating. So check this out. Longer hanger allows me to do this. And it's not in my way at all. As a matter of fact, it positions the sword in a very convenient position. If you're Kill Bill fans, when she's in the plane with her katana in the convenient katana seat holder there, it's kind of like that. So yeah, you can see if I was planning to be sitting or riding in vehicles, this would be ideal. But for walking around, moving around, not so much. But remember that ingenious design of those original hangers. They had hooks in two positions, so you could quickly take it from here to up here and back again. So yeah, I think I'm going to have to break down and either make or buy a reproduction version of that and try it, because the version I've got here, I've got to swap hangers if I want a different height. But to be continued, part 2, we'll talk about 2 hangers. And until then, let's get our conversation going as usual in the comments. If you have any questions, any ideas for future videos, any experience of your own to share, absolutely. And thanks as always for watching, following my journey, subscribing to the channel, sharing the videos, liking the videos, and I hope to see you back for when, well, I get a second hanger on my sword.